The sun was shining when Monson exited the small, strange building. The light warmed up his surroundings, allowing the aromas to mix even more than before class. It was almost overpowering. Upon passing the tree where he had hid himself earlier, he glanced toward the spot where that girl was singing. The view brought the melody sharply back to him, and he found himself humming softly as he continued to walk to his next class. He stopped, however, when for a second time that day, he heard something strange and out of the ordinary. It sounded almost like a gargling sound, but that was not quite right. It was deeper and did not sound human. Suddenly, something walked out in front of him. It was a cat. The cat walked casually and stopped in the middle of the path. It sat and lifted a paw, licking it lightly and purring loudly. A very pretty animal, its coat was the darkest black, slick and shiny. It looked well fed and groomed, as a cat should be. He bent down, resting his body on his knees, making a mental note that this was exactly what the singing girl was doing. He offered his hand to the cat, and the cat sniffed it. It leapt into his arms, its purring growing even louder. Whoa! He fell back, catching the cat. Large yellow eyes stared up at him. He placed a hand on the cat's head, scratching lightly. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" The cat did not answer. Not that he expected it to. He stood up and put the cat on the ground, and then smiled. "I'm sorry I can't hang out with you more. I'm going to be late to my next class. Oh, it's probably going to rain too, so don't get wet, okay?" He left, glancing back to see the cat watching him. He turned around as he thought of something else. Do cats make gargling sounds? Something was not right. He turned again, hoping to see the cat. Except it was gone, without a trace. Monson headed towards the dreaded last class of the day, gym. It was not that he did not like exercise or anything like that, but his physical strength at this point was not what he would call extensive. On top of that, gym class would require gym clothes. He did not want people to see more of his scars than was absolutely necessary. Collin did require it, however, so Monson did not see that he had any choice in the matter. The physical education classes were in a gymnasium/stadium, commonly known as the Yard. No one could tell him why people called it the Yard, but then again, his circle of acquaintances were not what he would call extensive. He was quite sure that it had another name, probably after the person who donated the money for it. Much to his frustration, it took him a very long time to find the Yard. He probably could have done it much faster, but he was also trying to avoid the large groups of people going to and from class. Not that he hated groups either. He was just feeling uneasy at this point, so he opted for this route instead. It was time-consuming, and it did irritate him, but he thought it was for the best. Lucky for him, Artorius and Casey opted to take the same conditioning course with the rest of the Legion hopefuls. So, in a best-case scenario, they would be waiting for him when he finally found it. If he ever found it. The Yard was located on the far southwest corner of the campus, partially obscured by the surrounding national forest. It was set up on the opposite side of the Collin River, on the crest of one of the larger hills in the valley. He exhaled as he examined the highlights on the glossy map. Red meandering lines led to a large structure with a large number 1 located under it. He rolled his eyes as he continued to move, periodically scanning the surrounding buildings and the map to verify his location. He had to admit, he was seriously annoyed. Who sticks a gym in the middle of the freaking forest anyway? Monson thought. Literally, it was in the middle of the forest, and there were no other buildings located within at least a quarter mile of the structure. It just did not make any sense. There can't be that many people that come to the games, could there? He said to himself. The map in tow and following the stone signposts along the way, he finally stepped out of the tree-covered path and came into view of a large oval structure. It was massive and new, which, in contrast, looked totally out of place among the simple forest setting. It was a very handsome structure, however. And while lacking the grandeur of both the GM and the Colosseum, it was quite obvious that it was very expensive. A large cobblestone walk suddenly appeared as he came into a large striped asphalt area that he assumed was the guest parking lot. On the far side of the lot, he saw another one of those overly large decorative arches the school was so fond of. The river wrapped around the complex, sweeping along its border like some kind of moat, and had a large cobblestone bridge arching over it. He hurried, making his way across the bridge, ignoring his fleeting observations of masonry and sculptures that displayed the same mastery and poise as almost everything else in Collin. More of the large stone statues decorated the slight incline leading up to the front gates of the yard. These statues, however, were different from the ones in any other locations on campus. Instead of the Roman deities like the ones in the entryway and barracks, these statues depicted epic battles between Roman legionnaires and barbarian hordes, forever immortalized in carved stone. He suddenly remembered what Brian said of the Roman greatness during their discussion about the murals on the landing of his apartment. He stopped walking as he thought this. He knew he was late, but something about the thought and his surroundings begged for further scrutiny. He started walking again, looking at the statues more closely. Upon closer examination, he noticed an apparent difference in the barbarian countenances. They lacked detail and care, almost as if the sculptor was trying to prove a point. Point or not, the effect of the absence of detail versus the pure artisanship of the eloquently sculpted legionnaires spoke clearly. These great ones are ones worthy of notice, of praise, of following. These statues said plainly that trying to give accreditation to anyone other than the legionnaires was both wrong and out of the ordinary. Monson wondered how many fools actually believe this. Ha! He thought, stopping to take a breath. He placed a hand on the statue, leaning forward to get a better look. The difference was even more obvious up close. Stupid elitist, he thought. He moved on to examine a dueling scene between a Roman general and what looked like an Italian Visigoth. Again, Brian's words came sharply back to his mind, as if he were standing next to him. What was it about the Romans that made them great? Do you think the people the Romans conquered thought they were great? It was strange. After he had thought this, he found his distaste for the statues grow exponentially. He glared at the Roman general. Yeah? Well, I hope that crazy guy with the mustache kicks your butt. The statue did not say anything in response. They never do. Like the cat, statues are not exactly known for their talkative nature. He laughed at this. A talking statue was a ridiculous thought. As he eyed the frozen scene for a moment more, something changed. He moved his head just a little bit to the side, taking in a different angle of the statue's face. He looked a little closer, staring intently. It was almost as if the Roman's face moved slightly. He did a double take and then stopped, suddenly realizing how absurd that was. No, that was impossible, probably a trick of the light. Despite this, however, he suddenly found an overwhelming desire for company starting to well up inside him. He moved quickly, leaving the sculptures to their own devices, not sparing them a backward glance. Quite relieved to get out of the solitude of the outside, Monson made his way around the yard's massive hallways. It was bigger than he had thought, and like the rest of Collin, hard to navigate. He was correct in assuming that the place was brand new. The flooring was made of pure white marble, placed perfectly in huge 5x5 slabs. Gleaming white columns like the ones at the Collin Colosseum were placed every 10 feet or so, simultaneously making up a part of the structural integrity and the splendor of the place. The hallway directly inside the doors had a huge ticket counter with rows of windows, complete with speakers and little holes for exchanging money and tickets. The columns and other spaces looked highly decorated as well, but he exercised some self-control and continued to move on. His first real dilemma was a large fork on the main path. Another large statue of the Roman king of the gods stood before him, acting almost like a sentry to the crossroad of two important but two very different paths. Two large signs made of what looked like white soapstone hung stationary, suspended by large, highly polished steel chains. The signs really did not seem to fit with the rest of the highly decorated space. They changed the scene somehow and gave the decor a slightly cheesy feel. In his eyes, it negated the quintessence of antiquity and refinement so carefully emplaced in every aspect of the school's character and appearance. It seemed almost silly. To his own surprise, it made him laugh. "Well, I guess no one's perfect," he thought. He tried to decipher the messages suspended above him. A few simple words sat superimposed on the large markers. The first and larger of the two signs had the words "Battlegrounds," etched with highly artistic lettering. In fact, the lettering was so artistic it was almost hard to read. Next to the lettering was a large shaded arrow, which indicated that to reach the battlegrounds, you would take the left fork. The second and smaller of the two markers indicated training grounds. Given the choice, the idea of checking out the battlegrounds was highly appealing to him. It just sounded interesting. Despite this, and seeing that he was already late, he decided he should probably hurry and find his class. Thinking that the training grounds was the more likely of the two for a class location, he thought he would try that. Before he left, however, he looked at the statue guarding the fork again. He really liked that statue. He took the training grounds passage and before long found his gym class. Granted, it was relatively easy once he started seeing various students dressed in gym uniforms. He stepped through the large steel doors into a gymnasium that looked more like a multi-sport complex than a gym. Students were scattered all over the place, engaged in various activities. Some played volleyball, basketball, and other normal high school pursuits. Many students, dressed in karate gi, and others in fencing attire, were already in the beginning forms of their individual disciplines. Monson grimaced. "Is the whole freaking school here? Don't any of you people read?" he said to himself. He did not have much time for his self-pity party as he saw Casey jogging over to him. "Yo, hero." Casey looked at him cautiously. "What took you, bro? Coach Abel's already taken roll, man." "I couldn't find the dumb place. Who puts a huge stadium in the middle of the forest? Seriously." He squinted while his eyes adjusted to the light. The hallways had been quite a bit darker without the large circular fluorescent lights that hung above him now. "Not to mention I wanted to avoid all the oncoming traffic. Didn't want to bring attention to myself, you know? It was really harder than I thought." "Yeah, bro, I know what you mean." Casey had a knowing look on his face. He was kind enough not to ask why Monson did not want to mingle with the other students. "Well, bro, we better get you a locker and inform Abel that you're here or he's gonna have an aneurysm." He pointed over his shoulder towards Coach Abel, who was talking to some older students and had not taken notice of them. "Point taken." As they started off, Monson looked around. "Hey, where's Artorius?" Monson fell into step next to Casey as they moved towards a large pair of double doors marked Men on the opposite side of the gym. "Oh, he's over yonder somewhere, talking to some chickadees," said Casey, pointing vaguely to his left side. "Seriously, we need to find that boy a woman. I think he may lose it soon." Whatever that means. Monson suddenly remembered the encounter with Kylie in the entranceway of the GM. Speaking of women, Casey, when are you going to tell me what happened between you and Kylie?" "Dude, we better hurry before we're busted, man." Casey's voice sounded hurried, and he quickened his pace. "Aw, come on." Monson rushed after him. The fact had not been lost on him that Casey just totally shafted him, but after that drama at the GM, he was expecting that Casey would put up some resistance. Despite Casey's elusive nature, Monson found that the more evasive Casey was about the subject, the more he wanted to know. He would have to try to be a little smoother when asking. He again quickened his pace, trying to catch up with Casey, who looked as if he was trying to hide the fact that he was angry. They arrived at the double steel doors of the inner locker room. At the same time, a group of boys dressed in dark blue gym shorts and simple white t-shirts with the Corn crest came stumbling out of the doors, pushing one another around and generally goofing off. The last boy saw Casey walking towards them and apparently without thinking held the door open while standing to one side. Casey acknowledged this gesture with a simple nod of his head. He passed the boy entering the locker room, not sparing a glance backwards. Monson was also moving, but again fell behind Casey because of the latter's outrageous pace. He slid through the door seconds after Casey, but before he could get all the way through, a sharp pain erupted in his head, neck, and upper back. The door had swung closed and whacked him with enough force to make him stagger and drop to one knee. The ringing of the blow was still echoing through his skull as he turned around to try and see what had happened. The boy stood in the now propped open doorway, leaning against the frame. He was laughing with his friends.
"You need to be more aware of your surroundings,"
said the boy as his friend patted him on the back.
"If you aren't, bad things might happen. And we wouldn't want that, now would we?"
Monson thought he sounded apologetic, but something in his voice was just not right. Monson answered in a voice that did not sound like his own.
"You're right."
Monson glared at the boy, his voice going very quiet.
"We wouldn't want bad things to happen, as we might be held responsible for those bad things, and that would be even worse."
The boy looked shocked at Monson's tone and response. Suddenly looking livid, he knelt down to Monson's level. He spoke with an equally soft voice.
"You better be careful, peasant. This is a place where your kind isn't wanted. You should know your place and be aware to whom you're talking before you get mouthy. Or didn't I hit you hard enough?"
Anger pulsed through Monson as he attempted to shake the pain from his head. The words of the boy confirmed his suspicions. The strike from the door was on purpose. This should have thrown his thoughts into a state of confusion. Questions should be erupting from within him as these unexplainable events unfolded. This, however, did not happen. Far from clouding his thoughts, this incredulous statement solidified his discontentment. His mind became clear and his focus sharp. Time ground to a screeching halt. Blood-red images flashed past his eyes as bitterness and outrage infused him. He glared a murderous stare. Even more frightening than his fear, confusion, and anger were the new feelings starting to surface. These new feelings felt foreign and dangerous. He tried to restrain them, but they filled him up, bringing him to the brink. Slowly, painfully, something inside gave way, and the sensation washed over him, consuming him from head to toe and drowning him completely in rage. He started to move to his feet, tears of anger and repulsion flowing freely, more from the struggle inside his mind than his external injuries. Dimly, through the haze of foreign emotion, he barely registered the boy's reaction. The group's faces started to change, almost as fast as the new and overwhelming feeling engulfed him. Their haughty arrogance melted away to apprehension as fear seemed to infuse their bodies. He was properly on his feet now, glaring with the newfound inferno within him. He started to walk towards them, not knowing what he was doing, and not caring in the least about the consequences.
"Yo, Monson!"
A hand pulled at his shoulder and Monson spun around to look at Casey straight in the eye.
"Snap out of it, dude."
Monson awoke. At least, that's what it felt like. He felt suddenly drained, as if he had just ran a marathon. He did not say anything to Casey, but turned quickly back towards the boys, just in time to see the outer door slam shut. They were gone. He slowly turned back towards Casey, who just stood there, gawking at him.
"Dude, what'd you do?"
Casey looked at him uneasily, as if he was seeing a ghost, a very scary ghost.
"Nothing."
Monson's head felt fuzzy.
I asked them if they wanted to dance, but they said I wasn't good enough. Made me kind of angry."
He lied to Casey, and he knew it, but he was not ready to open up that much. Not yet, anyway.
"Gray, Now is not the time for joking, man. Why were you on the ground? And why did those guys look like they were going to piss their pants, man? Oh, don't exaggerate, Casey.
The fuzziness was fading now.
I must have offended them somehow, so they thought they would give me some special treatment. I wasn't in the mood.
Casey eyed him suspiciously. Monson could tell that Casey did not believe that was the whole story.
Damn, Casey's a sharp one,
thought Monson. He tried a different approach, hoping to end the conversation quickly. He stepped closer to Casey.
Hey, why are you getting on my case? I mean, I get whacked in the back of the head with a metal door and you're acting like I just killed someone. Dude, sorry, bro.
He sounded like it.
Seriously, I didn't mean to accuse you. It's just not very often that a group of 5 upperclassmen go running right after they haze a younger student.
He looked at Monson thoughtfully.
I don't know what happened, but something made them tuck tail and run. They probably saw a teacher or something.
Monson shrugged.
Come on, we need to get out of here before Artorius takes all the ladies. Huh, you mean before Artorius gets smacked, bro?
They both laughed and started in on normal conversation, though Monson was only halfway paying attention. He was not a person who usually lost control like that. He prided himself on that fact. Granted, reasons almost never came up, but what was that strange feeling? It felt so distinct and powerful, but dangerous, very dangerous. He thought back to the feeling and then shook his head. That feeling, whatever it was, did not feel like him, but nonetheless was a part of him, something memorable, but at the same time foreign. Right now, he wanted nothing more than to run to his room and immerse himself in his journals. There must be mention of this somewhere. He would not forget something like this. Then another thought came, one that could be just as true, yet was not any more comforting. Maybe this was not some old character flaw, but rather something new, a product of the attack his body and spirit suffered. He did not know. He would have to wait to find out. Maybe ask Molly about it. Until then, he would have to do his best just to push it out of his mind. It did not take the two of them long to find Coach Abel's assistant, Coach Hawk. The huge and intimidating man had thick blonde hair, large light blue eyes, and some pretty nasty scars on his face. Actually, they were kind of similar to Monson's. He, unlike Coach Abel, actually played professional football back in the 80s. No one really knew why he quit. Apparently, he was very talented. Despite this talent, he did quit, suddenly, and then ended up at Collin, where he had been ever since. Like Taurus's background, this was all new to Monson. Casey had given him the Cliff Note version of the story while walking towards the office. He had listened patiently as he did not have the heart to tell Casey he could care less. Coach Hawk's office looked like a converted storage room. In the room was a large blackboard filled with chalk designs of potential plays. Elsewhere hung training schedules and other sports paraphernalia, scattered on many different shelves around the room. The man himself was sitting at a small desk, tapping lightly on his computer keyboard. The space looked way too small for a man his size, almost as if the chair, desk, and even the room was going to burst at the seams. A stream of steady jazz music reverberated in the enclosed space, leaving the impression of a 50s-style dance club more than an office. Casey yelled so he could be heard over the music.
Hey, Coach Hawk, I wanted to introduce you to the...
Coach Hawk cut him off by putting up one massive finger. He did not take his eyes off the screen, however. At least, that is what they thought he was doing. In reality, he was not watching the screen at all. He did not even have his eyes open. Moving slightly to their left, Monson and Casey found an unrestricted view of Coach Hawk's face. The giant of a man was sitting in his chair, eyes closed, humming tonelessly to the jazz music blaring from the computer speakers. Monson laughed while Casey stared in astonishment. Finally, Monson spoke quietly to Casey.
Hey, that's not something you see every day.
He tried to keep his voice low.
You said it, bro. He's a bit of an oddball,
agreed Casey, though not quite as softly.
Should we come back later? Maybe.
Casey looked back towards the door.
Come on, you can just use my...
Attention!
They both jumped, just as the husky voice echoed threateningly around the small office. Coach Hawk, apparently finished with his meditation or whatever it was, now stood towering over them, his hard eye leveled at Monson. The boys quailed underneath the man's stare, coming to the point where Monson almost ran from the room. Monson was not easily intimidated, but thought he would make an exception in this case. Before he could move either way,
"This must be the new Hornveer."
Coach Hawk was smiling now, and though his voice retained its husky quality, it sounded sincere, almost kind.
Monson Grey.
He stepped forward and offered his hand.
I'm very happy to meet...
He was cut off when, at that exact moment, the huge man took him in both of his arms and squeezed him like a teddy bear.
"I am so happy to finally meet you."
Monson thought the man was crying, although he could not be sure of this, as his own ability to breathe suddenly became a far more pressing issue.
"This is truly a momentous occasion, a time when we can meet and greet one another like brothers and forge ahead in the tradition of my German ancestors. Hey, Coach Hawk, we, like they once did, shall push forward, experience being our guide. Coach, I shall act as shepherd, and you as sheep. Coach!"
Coach Hawk stopped talking but still maintained his iron hold on Monson.
"Did you say something, Grey?"
I can't breathe.
"Oh, sorry, Grey."
He let go of Monson, who consequently dropped to the ground, crumpling as he landed next to Casey. Casey was trying, with growing desperation, not to laugh. Monson had hit the ground hard, harder than Coach Hawk intended at least. Seeing this, he grabbed Monson by his collar and hoisted him back up, suspending him a few inches above the ground. Monson's feet finally hit the floor.
Hey, Coach.
Remnants of his amusement were still evident on Casey's face.
We need to get Monson a locker, man. Mind helping us out?
"I would be overjoyed to help you, if you would be so kind as to allow me to lead you."
Coach Hawk gave them a quick tour of the locker room, showing Monson the showers, lockers, spa, and different therapy areas. Lastly, he showed him a strange sort of dispenser unit.
"And now, may I present to you the clothing unit. This is where you will obtain your clothes every day for class. When you are done, simply place the clothes in one of the bins over there."
He pointed towards large blue bins on the opposite wall.
"They will be washed and placed in the dispenser again. Any questions?"
Monson and Casey shook their heads.
"Then, until we meet again, I bid you farewell."
He left, whistling his jazz song from earlier. Monson and Casey emerged from the boys' locker room 5 minutes later, Monson having changed into the appropriate attire and Casey still chuckling about their encounter with Coach Hawk.
He's an interesting one, isn't he?
Monson strolled casually towards the large dark blue mat. He rubbed his ribcage almost instinctively.
I think he broke one of my ribs.
Casey renewed his laughter, trying to speak through gasps of air.
Crazy, huh, man? Not what you'd expect from an ex-pro football player, right? No, not at all.
"Hey, Casey, Monson,"
came a familiar voice. They both shifted their bodies as they saw Artorius come into view, followed by 4 girls, all who looked about their age. When he was finally close enough to Casey and Monson that he did not have to yell,
"Hey, what took you guys so long?"
Sorry, man, I got lost.
Then, making a slight nod in their direction,
I see where you've been, though.
Before he could answer, a girl with a large amount of light brown hair stepped forward. It was the same girl he saw laughing at his exchange with Casey earlier that day, the same one that Artorius seemed so interested in. He suddenly realized that this was what Artorius was doing during his absence at lunch. He had gone looking for this girl.
Indigo Harrison.
She pushed her hair out of her eyes.
You must be the new Hornveer. Also known as Monson Grey.
Monson smiled at her, his mind racing.
Harrison. Why does that name sound so familiar?
He thought. He gestured towards the girl's companions.
And who are your friends?
Indigo turned and pointed while saying each of their respective names. Morgan Wright, an olive-skinned girl with very bushy eyebrows, waved.
Christy Wayne,
a blonde, curvy girl who was not particularly good at hiding her assets, or maybe she just did not care.
And Ignace Ikeko,
a pale girl with very large, tawny-colored eyes, smiled at him. Monson smiled and nodded at each of the different girls. Their reactions to his appearance confused him. They looked disgusted, that much was sure, but intrigued at the same time. Was he missing something here? He looked at Artorius, who was looking like a kid in a candy store. A very large candy store. He saw that Artorius was eyeing Indigo expectantly. She seemed to be trying to avoid his gaze. There was an awkward silence after the introductions. Monson could tell that Casey was trying not to laugh again. The girls were looking at Monson as though they wanted him to say something. Finally, he spoke.
Well, it was nice meeting all you. I'm just gonna go over here now.
He moved, rather quickly, towards a large mat where a sizable crowd of people watched some kind of duel, occasionally cheering. He moved carefully among the students, bobbing and weaving to move close enough to be able to see what had so thoroughly caught their interest, not to mention moving away from the stares of Artorius' new friends. At last, he was able to move around enough of the observers to see what they were watching. In the middle of the mat, two people were engaged in a heated mock combat with large sticks formed crudely in the shape of swords. They resembled the ones that Casey and Artorius used the day before. Masked and covered in a weird kind of body armor, he watched as the two combatants strove against each other, trying to gain ground. The contest did not last long, however, as the shorter of the two fighters was far more skilled. His movements were small and sharp, and almost totally defensive in nature, taking very few opportunities to counterattack. More often than not, he defended with a one-handed style, often leaving the other hand draped to one side. This probably explained why he was using a shorter stick. A longer one would have made this type of fighting style difficult. The blows continued from the larger opponent for a moment longer, becoming stronger and more violent, until an incredibly fast counter from the short combatant effectively disarmed his opponent. Weaponless, the larger foe, a boy with a face like a pug, bowed his head and pulling off his helmet, started to walk off the mat looking embarrassed.
Whoa, he's good.
Casey eyed the two fighters critically.
Interesting. You don't usually see kendo in American private schools.
Kendo? Monson turned his attention to Casey.
What's kendo?
The term sounded vaguely familiar. He wondered where he had heard it.
Japanese fencing, bro.
Casey peered past Monson towards the shorter fighter.
I wonder who that dude is. There aren't many people that study Japanese sword fighting in the style of the Kodachi, especially here in the States. It's popular in Japanese schools, but...
Casey stopped as if something suddenly occurred to him.
Wait, you don't know what kendo is? How can that be? Don't you have a bokken? A what?
Thought Monson.
Did I hear that correctly? A bokken? What the hell is that?
Monson strained his mind for a moment. Then suddenly something clicked in his head.
Oh, is that what that shiny stick is? I wondered what it was called. So it's for, like, fencing, right? Dude, you didn't know that? You don't fence? You move like a fencer.
Why do you say that?
Gray, you remember how we met, right?
Of course. But what does that have to do with fencing?
Dude, I'm a martial arts student.
Casey smiled.
I took up rapier fencing in middle school and not long after that, kendo. After a while, you can just tell the people that I've had training. I could have sworn that you had at least some experience in it. The way you blocked Arthur's attack isn't something normal people can do, man. Your counter was perfect. You aren't just pulling my leg, are you? You really haven't fenced before?
Monson struggled to answer Casey's question. Fencing. He really liked the sound of that. The mere thought of the word made his fingers suddenly feel tense, but he could not remember fencing at any time, Nor had he read anything about fencing in one of his many journals. They were quickly coming to the topic that he wanted desperately to avoid. He thought a diversionary tactic was probably his best bet.
So, you can tell things about fighters just by observing them?
Monson was sure Casey would not buy this diversion.
What can you tell about our vertically challenged friend over there, then?
Monson pointed at the shorter fighter, who was now fighting furiously with a new opponent. If Casey caught on to his redirection, he did not let it show.
Well, you see, the kodachi is a blade smaller than the katana or Japanese longsword. They're made for defense. The fighting style developed for this type of blade is usually augmented by an aggressive hand-to-hand combat, something like kempo or some kind of jujitsu. This one, however...
Casey paused for a moment as he watched.
This one doesn't seem to exhibit any of that type of tactic or style.
His eyes narrowed as if he were considering something.
Well, of course he doesn't. This isn't an actual battle. It's a match. He'd totally be disqualified if he struck him with his hands. But now that I think about it, it's rather odd that they aren't using a shinai. I wonder why.
So, what's a shinai? Casey brought his hands up, stretching them as he looked at the fighter. He looked back at Monson.
Dude, a shinai is a bamboo sword that's used in official kendo matches. They don't use balkans. They're too dangerous. You can break some bones with one of those, bro.
Yeah, Monson agreed. He returned his attention to the match.
Now that you mention it, that doesn't really look like a match, but rather actual combat. Not that I would really know the difference. Totally.
Casey nodded in agreement.
They don't even have a referee. I think I'm gonna go talk to him. I want to know where that dude trained. Really? Why bother?
Monson could not think of anything less interesting. Casey replied,
Dude, how could I not want to know? I mean, how cool is that? Seriously.
Monson chuckled. Yeah, you have a point. Very cool. This, however, brought up another question. Hey, Casey. Monson tried to regain his friend's attention as Casey was attempting to catch a glimpse of the shorter fighter as he adjusted his mask. What kind of martial art do you do? Casey's eyes lit up.
You know, that's a very interesting question. Honestly, I have no idea what it's called, bro.
Monson raised his eyebrow in his signature gesture. That's weird. How do you study something you don't even know the name of? Who taught you?
It's a family thing. My dad taught me when I was very young, then my uncle took over.
Why'd he do that? Casey looked uncomfortable. Apparently Monson was not the only one that had things he did not want to discuss. Okay, well, why wouldn't your uncle tell you the name of your art? That seems kind of weird to me.
Yeah, it has something to do with mastery, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't really paying much attention.
So, you don't know anything about its origins?
Wait, I didn't say that, bro.
Well?
I think it's from somewhere in China or Asia at least.
Wow, that's profound. A martial art coming from Asia.
Amazing. Your powers of deduction are outstanding.
Casey glared at him. Then turning around, he started to move towards the opposite side of the gym. Monson moved after him.
Wait, where are you going? Come on, Casey, it was just a joke. Dude, I don't want to be overheard. That's kind of a long story.
They sat down on the corner of a mat away from the group, still watching the fencers. Reclined in a comfortable position, Monson gave Casey the go-ahead. Casey, however, was not paying attention but looking directly over Monson's shoulder.
What?
Monson turned to see what Casey was looking at. Artorius was standing with the same group of girls not 50 feet away. Two of the girls had been looking their way, then quickly turned around when Monson twisted to look at them.
That dude's never gonna learn.
Casey shook his head and chuckled slightly.
I don't know how many times I'm gonna have to say this before we need an intervention. We need to find that boy a lady.
Poor Artorius. Monson was proud he did not laugh. Anyway, he returned his attention to Casey. On with your story and make it snappy. I still need to check in with Coach Abel.
All right, I get it.
Casey settled back, looking thoughtful. His face changed slightly, becoming much more serious.
All right, I think I came to the Asian conclusion when I was about 10.
His eyes screwed up in concentration.
I guess the first and most obvious reason was all the references to life energies.
Life energies? Casey smiled and looked like he was about to start laughing.
Dude, has anyone ever mentioned you do that a lot?
Do what a lot?
That. Answer everything in a question?
I do not.
Sure you don't.
Before Monson could retort, Casey continued.
Anywho, we were talking about life energies. In Asian martial arts, life energies are commonly called chi or chakra.
Chakra? This time Casey cocked an eyebrow, copying Monson's move. Monson slumped.
I did it again, didn't I? Yeah, dude, you did. Damn it!
Monson scowled.
Okay. Tell me about chakra.
The subject was long and drawn out, and Monson did not understand everything that Casey said, but after some explanation, he thought he may have caught the main points.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Through meditation and training, you can focus the different energies in your body and use them to fight? Yeah, well, it's a bit more complicated than that, but I guess right in the essentials.
No way.
Seriously, I do it all the time. You're full of it. All right, I'll prove it.
Casey stood up.
Come over here.
He guided Monson to the middle of another large wrestling mat, a little farther away from the other kids in the class.
All right, bro. Before we start, do you think you could help me warm up a bit? This takes some time, and it's dangerous if you use it without preparing yourself.
He paused.
And I have a little theory I'd like to try out.
Monson was still skeptical.
Sure. What can I do to help? You can defend yourself.
What? Casey leapt at him, attacking with amazing speed. A low kick that hit mid-thigh struck Monson. To his amazement, Monson's body reacted seemingly on its own, actually stepping into the blow, diminishing much of the force. Casey, aiming for his face, threw a monstrous cross-body blow, a split second after this low kick. Monson deflected this with a smooth movement of the wrist, causing much of the punch to miss its mark and pass harmlessly to his side. Both boys remained in the position for a moment, giving Monson time to marvel at his actions. Casey eyed him suspiciously.
Dude, you're really interesting, Grey. Here, let's try this.
He stepped back and took up a stance, body leaning forward, fists up and in front of him. Monson took in the stance. It looked very aggressive judging from the body position, and was probably very offensive in nature. He paused as he thought about this.
Where did that come from? He thought. How would I know what kind of stance that was?
Casey, however, did not give him time to answer the question. Monson was right in his judgment. Quick, powerful strikes with closed and open fists started coming in all different directions as Casey came at him. Monson kept his hands close to himself, using small circular movements to block the onset of attacks. He was actually quite successful and matched Casey blow for blow, despite being almost totally defensive. More than once, however, Casey's attack style changed. It seemed to start with the form or starting position of his body before he attacked. When this starting form changed, Casey's entire attack style changed with it. In their short bout, Monson counted 5 separate forms, all of which were completely different in power, speed, and emphasis. It was as if Casey grew up learning not one fighting style, but 5. It was a bit scary, but even scarier was Monson could comprehend all of this.
I shouldn't know this,
the words echoed in his mind. He should not know, but he did. He could see the forms. He could see the change and flow of the different styles. He could tell this was a dangerous martial art, and Casey was very good at it. He was not sure which was more disconcerting, that he knew so much about fighting or that his new friend was such a good martial artist. There was no explanation for this. None whatsoever. Monson did surprisingly well, but took more than a few blows. His body seemed to ache as he went through the movements, as if his muscles were remembering something painful and persistent. He did connect with a shot or two. Casey's form-based style was as wild as his fencing. Casey had openings, plenty of them, but Monson just could not find the mindset or spirit he needed to take advantage of them. Their little battle drove on for the better part of 5 minutes, until, after a particularly vicious spinning back kick that was based on a flowing type form centered around the legs, barely missed Monson's head, he put up his hand.
Okay. I think you're warmed up, Case. What are you trying to do? You're gonna kill me. Dude, hardly. I wasn't exactly going easy on you and you're still standing. Are you sure you've never studied any kind of martial arts? Hell if I know. I haven't read about it yet.
Monson let the words go without thinking. He clapped his hand over his mouth. Casey just stared at him, confusion on his face. He smiled at Monson keenly.
Dude, we don't have to talk about it now, but seriously, I expect to hear about it later.
Monson let out a sigh of relief.
Sure, sometime.
Casey beamed at him, looking very pleased.
Well, regardless, you're awfully good for not knowing anything. I think you and Jason Bourne might be related, bro. Who's Jason Bourne? What? Seriously? Who's Jason Bourne? Are you kidding me? Wait, first teach me about chakra. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Okay, I think I'm ready.
He paused.
But we are so watching that movie.
Casey led Monson to the middle of the mat and showed him a defensive stance. Apparently you could easily get hurt with this exercise. Then, stepping away, Casey started to shake the different parts of his body vigorously. Monson stared at him inquiringly.
Dude, I want to make sure that everything's loose, right? Don't want to pull a hammy.
Monson decided not to comment. After more shaking, he took a position not far from where Monson was standing. He settled into a stationary stance and, closing his eyes, he started breathing deeply and slowly. Actually, he looked rather serene.
This may hurt a bit.
Casey raised his right hand, open-fisted, resting it on the palm of his left, and placed them both in front of his body into an on-guard type of stance. Intrigued, Monson continued to watch his friend, despite still being a little skeptical. Casey's movements continued in this fashion until they changed. It was hard to describe this change. It was slight and unobtrusive, but it was almost tangible. Something about the atmosphere surrounding his friend was different. You could feel an aura becoming more and more prevalent. The change in the air was not all Monson had to worry about. In that exact moment, it felt like someone was watching them. The onlooker's interest was not average either, but rather intense and focused. The hairs on the back of Monson's neck stood up as he spoke aloud, trying to calm down. He chided himself. He was being paranoid. He just needed to relax.
Hey, Casey?
Monson's attention was splintered between his friend and his search for the source of this uneasiness.
You don't think...
He never finished the sentence, as the sight he was now witnessing left him speechless. A red, water-like mist started to encircle his friend. It was like the shadowy contrast that appears on the inside of eyelids when looking at a bright light for a long time, then closing them. Monson gasped at the sight. What was this? Did he dare believe what he was seeing? He did not believe it. Monson closed his eyes, rubbed roughly, and opened them again. It was still there. The strange red mist seemed to swirl and enclose Casey. Casey's hands were moving now, moving through the air, leaving shadowy traces of red-streaked lines in their wake. The lines seemed different from the mist, but Monson could not articulate the difference. Casey looked focused, so utterly focused. This all-encompassing concentration seemed to climax when the mist slowly congregated on the palm of his right hand, becoming thick and distinct. The palm of his hand was face up, and the mist was infusing it with energy. Drops of the red globular substance came together in a mass, growing slowly to the size of a baseball in the very center of his palm. The substance swirled and bubbled like a volcano ready to erupt. It looked volatile and explosive. When it became apparent that further collection would be minimal, Casey opened his eyes. Monson stared as realization of what was about to besiege him came crashing into his consciousness. This culmination of events pushed him over that invisible line that marks the boundary between fact and fiction, real and make-believe. This could not be happening. This was impossible. His friend gazed at him, emblazoned with eyes of a demon. Monson felt a trickle of fear ripple through him. This strange display seemed to enter its final act when the excessive mist started to move. It wrapped around Casey's arm and up his torso, finding its way into his eyes, changing their color to a bright, iridescent red. Eyes, body, and palm glowing with color and energy, Casey stepped towards Monson.
"Oh no,"
were the only words Monson could muster.
You've been listening to the podcast-only novel of The House of Grey by Collin Earl. For more news, information, and updates, please visit houseofgreybook.com. Music by Figure of Fiends. Visit the band at myspace.com/Figure of Fiends. Cover art for The House of Grey provided by James Thane. More information at thayn.net.